Hi, I'm Jeff Wong, as Chris said, the Global Chief Innovation Officer at EY. And I am also very, very excited about our panel today. We'll get to Lyron, David, and Emily in just a second, but just to lay out a little bit of context, generative AI has certainly captured the imagination around the world as the new exciting technology that's here today. And in fact, while we've heard this story a few times in the past 18 months, the excitement around generative AI, I think, is a little bit different. What we see actually is with ChatGPT, the product that's put out by OpenAI, is the fastest growing product in internet history, or at least according to the numbers that we've been able to see and the research that has come out around it. And I think it's really captured the imagination of people around the world. One thing I definitely like about it is that it does a lot of fun things. My favorite thing is to ask it to write songs in the form of Beyonce or Taylor Swift on funny topics like inflation or the Fed. Sorry, my own nerd is coming out there. But also the wideness of what it can do, right? It can talk and think about a lot of different things. A lot of different topics, from, as I said, writing songs to writing essays to doing analysis to helping you create code if you're a developer out in the world. And so it's really exciting about the breadth of what it can do, but it's also exciting because of the impact that it can have across different industries. And here's where we have this wonderful panel that I really, really am excited to bring to you today. Because in some ways, generative AI is like a giant elephant, right? And we each can only see a different part of the elephant. But what we have here today are three leaders at the top of their field within and around generative AI who can help us see three different parts of the elephant. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a second, but Lyron Bentovim will help us look at generative AI in combination with some of the other interesting technologies that we've seen out in the world as a CEO of Glimpse Group. David Wu from Morgan Stanley is probably the most famous current implementation and partnership with OpenAI, the early the developer around ChatGPT, and can talk about how the product actually is implemented, how it works in real life, how that partnership has come together, and also some of the challenges associated with that. And then Emily Reid, who's the CEO of AI for All, who is the AI for All program, and a shameless plug here, I'm on the advisory board for AI for All, and it's great to have her here. Really, AI for All is surrounded and really led and sponsored by AI luminaries from around the world who are really helping us think about the responsibilities we have with artificial intelligence, but even more importantly, or equally importantly, the responsibility we have to make sure the next generation of AI leaders is a diverse set of leaders, which is an important aspect when we look at the implications from such a important and amazing technology that's come out. And so as a part of that, we'll also want to spend some time with this group talking about some of the challenges and some of the responsibilities we have with generative AI and AI more broadly. So let me get to introductions real quick. Enough of me talking. Lyron, why don't you give a minute or two introduction of yourself?
Thank you, and I'm honored to be here in this panel. And this is we've had some pre-calls, and this is just an awesome group, and I'm looking forward to an engaging conversation. My name is Lyron Bentovim. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Glimpse Group. We are a NASDAQ-listed virtual reality, augmented reality, immersive technologies, enterprise software and services company. We've been around for 7 years. I grew up in the previous tech cycle, the digital cycle, and when I saw the opportunity to be one of the leaders paving the way in this immersive tech cycle, where immersive technologies together with AI and blockchain are going to move us to the next digital cycle and immersive cycle, I jumped all in, and I've been enjoying every minute since. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Lyron. How about Emily? Why don't you go next?
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you so much to Jeff and the Asia Society for having me here. Jeff was one of our original supporters, advisors, funders, and has just been an amazing partner throughout. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be able to be here today. I run AI for All. Our program is focused on increasing diversity and inclusion in artificial intelligence. We've been around since 2017. And this has been an interesting period for us because when we were founded back in 2017 by Dr. Fei Li and some of her colleagues, her vision was really, how we desperately need to have a new generation of AI leaders who are thinking about issues like responsibility, ethics, a human-centered version of AI from the beginning of their education as opposed to the end of the engineering process. And so it started as a small program for a small group of girls at Stanford and has grown across the country. We now serve students in high school and in college. We serve students all across the board, but we focus on increasing diversity in terms of gender and racial and ethnic groups. And so our idea is that we really want to make sure that this kind of next generation, and I've kind of lately been calling it Generation Generative AI, it's technically Gen Z, but they're going to be, growing up with this in the way that, a previous generation grew up with the internet. This is going to be the world that they're heading into. And we want to make sure that our students can be influencers and be empowered leaders in that space. My own personal story is I started out life as an engineer. I have a degree in machine learning. And I, as I shared with the group before, the way I kind of see the world is computer scientists are problem solvers. And this issue of diversity and inclusion in tech was one of the problems I was most focused on solving. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to you all about this huge paradigm shift we're going through.
Great. Thank you, Emily. How about you, David?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the time and appreciate everyone taking the time to tune in. My name is David Wu. I'm a managing director in Morgan Stanley's wealth management business. I lead a function for wealth management called knowledge management, which effectively means my job is to get our internal employees, particularly financial advisors and their support teams, better information. Because at the end of the day, as a bank, we are knowledge workers, and getting knowledge workers better knowledge helps them do their job better. The reason I'm here is because in my journey of using different techniques and technology to drive that information retrieval, we, about a couple of years ago, were introduced to a company called OpenAI, which at the time, if you weren't in the niche field around AI, you probably didn't hear of. We were able to meet with them early, and it was at a time when they were making that transition from nonprofit to profit, and they're looking for large, well-known corporate partners that they could work on big problems with us. So we introduced them to our co-president and head of wealth management well over a year ago. And we subsequently been off to the races on a number of different use cases. Candidly, what's been such a wild ride for us personally is, whereas a year ago we had to go around the organization to introduce, hey, there's a company called OpenAI that's trying to do some amazing things. And in some cases, people got it. In some cases, people didn't get it. Fortunately, they released a product called ChatGPT in November of 2022. To Jeff's point, has become the fastest adopted technology in the history of technology. And we're thrilled to be along for the ride. I'm looking forward to sharing you what our journeys and our stories look like for the better part of a year and a half, and ways that you can get started for your respective organizations. Thank you.
Great. So thank you to you three for the introductions. Just for the audience, we highly encourage you to put your questions or thoughts or comments into the Q&A or the chat function. Get them over. We'd love to make this as interactive as possible and to discuss the concepts and ideas and questions that you want to discuss. But with that, the first thing we want to do is think about putting this generative AI thing to work. As Emily said, it's a paradigm shift. So we want to see some of this in action. Lyron, maybe, your company, you've put conversational AI, generative AI into your VR platforms. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about what you've done and the impact that you've seen from it.
Sure. So I'll break down kind of what you can do with it into a few buckets, because there's different things. So obviously, kind of as we look at virtual reality, one of the kind of easiest kind of introductions of AI is basically into role-playing scenarios. And we've basically integrated the ChatGPT into our virtual reality scenarios and started working with customers, exploring how we can use that. Because until now, when you wanted to kind of do a scenario role play in virtual reality, AI was very, very limited. And most of the times you have to basically role play. So if we want to play, for example, kind of a teller training in a bank, then kind of if I'm the teller, you're the customer, you come in and we have to go through this, and you would either get actors or you would get other kind of peers to play along. And that requires a lot of timing. Now you can actually do the training asynchronous, meaning you can have the AI, you can basically give knowledge to the AI, you can kind of teach AI what to do, and you can run with it. And kind of, it's pretty cool. And we've been kind of trying to push the limits, actually introducing multiple AIs and having them interact with each other, which is kind of talking about fun things. That becomes real fun when you let them start talking to each other and try and teach them how to behave and actually let each other talk, which is fun. So that's kind of basically one element. The second element comes into basically introducing the capabilities to design spaces and kind of really start kind of pushing the limits of what you can do with the technology on the graphical side. Initially on the 2D side, but I think the future is going to be on the 3D side, and we'll touch that more as we get into talking about the metaverse. And the third element, which kind of we've begun to kind of play around with, is actually writing code. And how do we kind of speed kind of the coding that we're doing by kind of doing some mundane elements or even doing some QA with the kind of the capabilities that ChatGPT brings to the table, and then kind of obviously reviewing the code and seeing that it does what it's supposed to, but definitely use that as a shortcut.
Well, Lyron, it sounds like an amazing world, and particularly the gaming world, where the world reacts to you as you move through it, right? And so it can change now much more dynamically than before. Again, some of that paradigm shift, Emily, that you were referring to before. But Emily, I want to come to you quickly next, which is, you clearly interact with some of the people who, frankly, invented the transformer technology, invented sort of where we are today. And I'm just curious, in your interactions, how are they thinking or talking about generative AI, right? How are they thinking about it from an application perspective? How are they thinking about it as its place in the world? I think that's just a really interesting perspective you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, for folks who aren't familiar, Dr. Fei Li, our founder, has had many accomplishments across the AI space, but was really made famous by her work on a project called ImageNet many years ago, which really proved out the idea of what you could do, what could be done with big data, and particularly from the kind of computing vision, machine vision point of view. And so, she, along with her colleagues and university leaders that we work with, some of our funders across the board. Jensen Huang was from NVIDIA, was one of our first funders as well. Are really folk kind of working right at the cutting edge of this technology. I've spoken with Fei about generative AI many times, and I think that the kind of board's view and perspective on it is that it's very much this kind of acceleration that we've been anticipating could happen for some time, and it's really, to us, it's all the more reason why our mission is so important, because I don't want to speak for her, but I think that the board and I would say that this is really very much what we founded the organization for. What we run the organization for is because we knew that a moment like this would be coming, and so it's all the more urgent and important at this time. With our university partners, it's been interesting because, of course, there's been lots of articles about how generative AI is really making things difficult for professors, and even for computer science professors now, because it can code. My father's actually a sociology professor, and he's trying to figure out how to, he can flip it on its head and maybe get students to try to write a sociology textbook using ChatGPT, which I thought was a cool idea, a way to just accept that it's going to be there as a tool. So how do we work with it? One of the things, though, that we're actually working on a campaign right now to get more of our students' perspective about generative AI. There's been, every week there's a new op-ed from folks talking about what this means. And I think it's going to be, we've had a lot of these conversations internally with our students, and I want to, kind of bring their voice to the forefront even more, because my hope is that they'll see things that we're not even considering right now, right? And that's where a lot of the innovation comes from. So stay tuned for that, because we're going to be working on a campaign for our students to share their perspectives.
Yeah, it sounds like, Emily, that's an important voice that needs to be heard in this whole discussion, which is the next generation, the ones who are growing up in this space, because I think to your point, they'll imagine a world that we don't even see yet. And then they'll go around building it and probably faster than we expect or want them to. David, I did actually want you to, you talked a little bit about your early partnership you hinted at your partnership with OpenAI. Morgan Stanley and you were in with OpenAI before any of this excitement and change happened, and you've been working on the most modern platform, like well in advance of the public release of it. I'm just think the audience might be curious about what is it that you've built, and how is it working for you today?
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of our partnership, for those that don't know, we are the only wealth management firm that has exclusive partnership with them, in the sense that we talk to their engineers all the time. We've had access to their GPT-4 model for months before it comes in. In fact, we had access to the alpha model, right, which helps us get a better sense of what the latest and greatest is that they're working on. And also they come to us for feedback on what we're seeing. So it helps them as they think about advancements going forward. But as we think about how do we employ this at Morgan Stanley, it was actually quite difficult to figure out, with a bit of technology that can virtually do anything, where do you start, right? That actually took us weeks to really sit down and come up to a core strategy. But at the end of the day, we realized at Morgan Stanley Wealth, we have the best financial advisors, we believe, in the world. We have the best research analysts and support staff, we believe, in the world. That anything that we want to use with this technology is all centered around how do we take our A players and make them even better A players, right? Using the full depth of capabilities. So where we started is really the bulk of where my function has been focused on, which is getting people information, right? But at the same time, a lot of folks hear, well, ChatGPT hallucinates and it makes stuff up. How can you give people good information? How can you say that, David? You want to give them good information, but you're using a piece of technology that is notorious for giving people potentially incorrect information. How does that reconcile? And that's been a lot of our journey, right? Our first use case has been giving our internal employees access to answers from our corpus of over 100,000 documents having to do with products, procedures, research, right? So we took the underlying brain that powers GPT, right? ChatGPT, which is called GPT 3.5, GPT 4. And we said, great, you've learned all this stuff on the internet. Well, we don't want the knowledge aspect of it, because they would even themselves argue it's not made for knowledge base. Instead, we want to understand we want to take all the semantic English or language understanding, language generation aspect, but instead only generate answers from our internal corpus of content, which we spent years curating, cleaning up, making sure it's not stale, and figuring out, how do I take that most relevant snippets of text that are most relevant to your question, and then hook it up into GPT so that it generates an answer, but it also tells you which sources it came from, all internal sources, gives you a reasoning step for how it got to that answer, and also asks you for feedback, because as we know in this world of machine learning, it only gets as good as the feedback you give it. So we can then engineer better responses over time. And safe to say, it's not an easy journey, Jeff. And a lot of the work we thought was GPT work, and there is work there, but a lot of it was just simply curating our own knowledge base and figuring out how do we retrieve the right elements in context of that given question.
So these are great examples of how the industry is thinking about it, but also some tangible examples of how people are using it, or how in particular this group, you three are using it. There's actually already questions coming in, but I'm gonna poke in one more before I start bouncing back and forth, which is when we think about making this real, right? So clearly in the audience, there are business leaders and government leaders listening to this right now. There's a lot of probably people thinking about, how do I make this real? How do I test? How do I prepare? How do I train around this? So maybe Lyron, you first. You had to bring this into your organization, right? And clearly you're a technology company already, but how did you think about that? How did you think about, as the leader of your company, bringing in this really new technology that has sort of a certain sense of unknown to it when you started down this pathway?
That's a really good question, Jeff. And kind of as we look at those things, you have to do basically the kind of long term and the short term. So you have to start with a long term vision of where this might go. But if you get stuck in the vision for too long, you'll never actually do anything. So you have to basically bring that vision down and say, okay, how do I kind of do something today that will be a path towards that kind of vision? So all the things I talked about, let's look at the role playing, right? So I think in the future, and we'll touch on that potentially later as we go into the metaverse and how kind of that will tie with AI, we will have worlds that will be filled with those AI agents that will kind of run around in these worlds. But we're not going to build that right now. The metaverse hasn't been built. So what do you do? So let's start with our experiences right now and just add initially one AI agent. And initially we even played around and have that person be a bartender. And because we had a virtual bar, and initially we just had like AIs that were not doing anything, just standing there. And what if we can actually order some drinks or kind of do something? I mean, we started playing with it, and it's kind of fun because we have a lot of people on our team that are very creative, and you just kind of open the door to them and say, here's what we're thinking, and just let them go, and you see where they are pushing it. And then you start saying, okay, now let's kind of take it to the next level. What happens if there's two of them? Or if we're in a conversation, how does the AI get in? Because it might interrupt us because it doesn't really know how to behave around people. So kind of really taking those steps. And same, you can look at the graphic element, you can look at the coding element. It's not like we're basically going to outsource all of our work to AI, but we're beginning to take steps, writing a subroutine and seeing what happens and kind of seeing how it does that, and kind of learning, kind of basically have a long-term vision where you want to go, and you bring it back and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. The first step, just related to kind of other organizations at large, what they need to do is understand where AI will impact their lives. Same as I was telling people kind of on the metaverse, kind of where is it going to impact your long-term vision as an organization, the services you provide to your customers, and how you're running your business. And then try and think about small steps that you can use what is available right now to do that, and never be shy about bringing in partners, whether it's us on the immersive technologies and our AI company, or kind of people kind of like Emily to help you kind of really think about the right way of integrating kind of that kind of technology into your world, and then take those steps forward kind of one by one, see how it works. Sometimes you fail and you go back and say, okay, this doesn't work kind of the way we wanted to. Let's go back and try something different.
Yeah, that's great. It's sort of make sure you understand the big opportunity and vision, but don't let that stop you from starting the journey and taking the first early steps, which were small in comparison to probably what your end vision is, but knowing that you have to walk your way there. That's really good advice. Emily, you talked about the students that we are training to sort of understand the future. And in many ways, I feel like they, as you mentioned, they probably understand the future better than we do, right? As students, as people who are still growing, who think about the world probably from a different perspective, a different context. But one thing I think that's important is learning about ChatGPT and the generative AI tools. So I know there's a big educational part of what AI for All does. How do you implement that into the curriculum? How are you bringing it in? Because I think that there's a nice parallel between what you're doing and how CEOs should be thinking about bringing this education understanding into their organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. So I would say We have a part in our curriculum where we're always kind of including hot topics, recent topics in AI. It's important to us that we make sure that our students are able to think about the cutting edge of AI, see what the possibilities are. And so that's something we're always kind of constantly doing and updating in our curriculum. Obviously, generative AI, the last couple months has been a huge topic for students. And so we have included, last year, we had actually included some material around Midjourney. We've done some material on DALL-E, ChatGPT. But one of the things the way that I think about this, and I think to your point, Jeff, this might be an interesting way to be thinking about it for business leaders in the audience is we want our students to be able to be the creators and the builders of this technology in addition to informed users, right? I think about it as it's great to be able to know how to read, but you want to be able to write too. Right. And so we want to make sure, so we have material on what is a transformer, right? What is the underlying technology behind a large language model? How does it work? Let's get under the hood. And so I think that that's a really, really important part of our students being able to understand the technology that they're seeing and using day to day. And certainly being being adept users of it. One of the things that I am really keeping an eye on too, and honestly would love, I think we're going to be going to questions in a bit, and would love some of my, fellow panelists or other folks in the audience, your thoughts on this, because we're in kind of a Wild West period of there's just so much that's changing so quickly. And I've been in the computer science education space for a little over a decade. And even that whole world is completely changing because we were training students to become software engineers. And now ChatGPT is doing, or Copilot on GitHub is doing half of your code for you. So it's a completely there's a need to zero in on these AI specific skills, I think. Software engineers who maybe had, one class in AI or a lecture on AI in college will need a lot more understanding of AI. But we want to make sure that as the jobs in this space are developing and changing, we're also continuing to put our students into roles and preparing them for roles where they are going to be empowered and have influence. We talked about an example like the prompt engineer role, and I've seen some articles with crazy salaries for these types of roles, but is that really going to be a long-term, possible role? I see David laughing over there, right? What does that mean? Is that really a great career, or are companies, right? There's sort of being money thrown at the problem right now? And I think about it similar to, we talked early on in the organization about wanting to train our students to be leaders in the field, and that there are more jobs being created around, say, data tagging, but that's not what that's an AI job, but that's not what we're preparing our students for. So just continuing to watch that as this landscape shifts is something that we're keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, Emily, that's, I think that it's important, right? I think everybody needs to know about these later generation technologies. And when you have, when a lot of executives on the call have their daughters and sons learning about this and teaching it to them, I think it's important for each of them to take it on themselves too. David, you described already a bit about the product that you have implemented. I wonder if you could give us a little more about the product itself and what it does, but maybe even more importantly, to emphasize, where do you think it heads from here? What are the other cool, fun, unique things that you can see going forward from even the product that you're implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just make a quick comment before I get there, because Emily referred to a Forbes article, which I think is called Mom, Dad, I Want to Be a Prompt Engineer. And I immediately had my team print out this, and I'm like, is this like a salary request update? And I'm not even going to list the number on there, but let's just say it was north of like 300,000 or something like that. So it's a weird conversation, but nonetheless, I think, Jeff, what I would say is I go back to the human element, and there's so many use cases we're thinking. In fact, one of the things that we're doing at Morgan Stanley is, in order to socialize more understanding of adoption, we're running a hackathon, right, involving all of our wealth management business areas, because our goal is we want to democratize access right? And we want to democratize the socialization of what the next priorities are. So we're asking our business areas to come up with ideas. And then we're going to have a one-day hackathon where different teams will compete to solve these ideas using GPT. And we're going to bring my team and our OpenAI partners to come in and help be a part of that process and hopefully walk away with a set of ideas that get prioritized. And we're going to socialize the best to senior management so they're aware of the outcome. But to my point around humans, look, I think about a financial advisor. I think about all the things they do that are not focused on what they do best, which is spending time with their clients and acquiring new clients. I'm thinking about all the systems that they have to toggle through. They're coming in, they're looking at research, they're looking at the account balance updates, they're looking at client statements, they're looking at placing trades, they're looking at risk tolerance things. It's just so much process and research type of stuff. And without getting into details, right? It's that element of how do I strip out the things that are away from the human to human interaction and how to even help them in preparing or help them follow up on the human to human interaction. I think that makes them really, really powerful. The analogy I always like, this makes any sense to anybody. I'm a sports guy, and apologies to anyone who's a Boston area sports guy. The analogy I use is imagine you had Tom Brady and these headsets, helmets have radio action to the coach, but it cuts off after 50 seconds. But imagine you gave Tom Brady Bill Belichick in his headset, right, to help him coach through or co-pilot him through everything he needs to do on the field. Imagine how powerful that would be. And that is the vision of where we want to get to with our financial advisor. Someone that technology is helping from every aspect, but letting them use their relationships and their people aspect and their empathy. Because I think that doesn't change, no matter how good this technology gets. And I know Emily, I really connect with what Emily says around the importance of just having the right people and that human touch in all of this capability. And I can't emphasize that strongly enough.
If I can expand on what David was talking about, kind of just thinking about Tom Brady with I actually look at if you look at quarterbacks that don't have Tom Brady's perception, which is one of his key strengths of what's happening in the field, because he would look in like 2 milliseconds and understand what the defense is trying to do. Now, imagine you can bring that to a young quarterback that has the arm strength and all those capabilities and give him basically that. And not only that, analyze what play you should call given what you're seeing. And that changes the whole game. But it really takes us to one of the places I think AI is going to go, which is basically an algorithm. So how do you take the essence of being a quarterback, not the physical element that kind of basically needs to be done by the physical quarterback, but all of that perception of what's going on and what's the best play. And in a sense, you're taking the coach, the offensive coordinator, the quarterback, all those best breeds. People will write their algorithm, and then you'll be able to use those as you're playing. That's going to change the game, kind of pun intended.
Yeah, Lyron, and I think, David, you're both pointing out how the nature of this technology can fundamentally change how we do things, or how our players on the field do things in a way that sort of leap steps over the current way that they run their processes or accept information or look at things. I think that's really what's exciting. But now I'm getting to the questions. It's also something that I think poses some challenges. So I'm going to come to you, Emily, because I know you have a lot of thoughts around the responsibilities we have, particularly with generative AI, but sort of the excitement around AI even more broadly. So the question is, that in some circles, there seems to be a sense of fear around this, right? And so we heard very publicly the request for a pause in development and things along those lines. Can you talk a bit about, again, you sit with some of the people who invented this world, invented this field. Can you talk about the sense that you think, when you think about responsibility, when you think about the things that society has to fear, is the way the question is phrased. How do you think about it? And what do you think the responsibility is for all of us as part of the, global community?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. And I think the fear in some ways, I don't know if it's the most productive emotion for this case, but it's very reasonable and it's realistic. There's real concerns. The thing that I feel is when I you mentioned the pause. And so, my initial reaction to the idea of the pause was, and for, folks who I'm sure have seen at this point, Future of Life Institute did this letter kind of talking about calling for a pause until there's, clearer guidelines, and having a pause on the development of these tools for 6 months. And truthfully, these are much bigger problems than we can solve in 6 months. And my feeling is that, while there's a part of me, I care deeply about responsible, ethical AI. There are parts of that, the idealist in me kind of wanted to agree with that letter, but the realist said, like, look, the toothpaste is out of the tube. And what we need to do now is really have a paradigm shift in how we're developing AI and how the workforce that's creating this AI is cultivated and supported, rather than calling for a stop on the technology. I think that that's really the paradigm shift that we have to have. And you mentioned responsibility. And I used to say to folks, back when I feel like I've for years been having this conversation where people say, well, what's going to happen when the robots take over, right? That type of conversation. And I'd sort of seeing it happen now. And I said, look, it's the truth is that there are, the AI systems that we've had in place for years have racial, gender, socioeconomic, national bias, right? There are real harms that are happening right now today and were happening years before, we had GPT come out, right? So these problems have been around, and they haven't always been futuristic. And so I think that's folks are seeing more now what the actual potential risk is. And so I think that fear is founded. But at the same time, I think that we have a responsibility. I'm blanking on the name of the person who wrote an op-ed to this effect, but I found myself agreeing with the idea that AI is like a mirror, right? It's a reflection of the world that we live in. There's a reason why previous chatbots that were released onto Twitter started tweeting very offensive things within 24 hours because it's built on the language of the internet, right? And I think actually OpenAI has done an impressive job at trying to put some guardrails in place there, but it's still not perfect because it's not possible. So I think that there is really a deep responsibility. One of the things that we had as part of the founding and beginning of our curriculum that we've been updating over time, but has always remained a consistent principle based on many of our founders' ideas is first thinking about data bias or what people will call algorithmic bias, but it's usually bias in the data set. So understanding that exists is important, but especially for a technical person to be able to understand the metadata about that data set, to be able to debias the data set, takes a fair amount of technical skill to do well. So that's one of the things that we teach. Another piece is explainability and transparency. Folks talk about the black box problem. That's a huge area. Another area is privacy and security. Obviously, with generative AI, this has been a huge concern. You might have seen the one of the new technologies that you can take a 3-second recording of your voice and create you could send a call to family, friend, to fake someone's voice. And I think that that's a huge issue. But I think there's also an issue of how the data that all of these tools are running on. What are the privacy and security issues there? Folks, some companies and employees have gotten in trouble because they're putting in secure protected information into ChatGPT. Right? So there's just sort of a whole new world of issues. And then the fourth part of that kind of set of responsible AI principles that we focus on is human-centered design and thinking about who is in the room when you're designing an AI system. How do you think about the effects, the social impact of those tools? And so I'm a believer in these are really powerful tools and there's a lot that we can do, but there is a risk of things going in the wrong direction if we don't take responsibility and decide where the train's heading.
Emily, there's a lot of reaction in the questions around responsibility and diversity. And so I want to bring it to, and I know you've spoken before about potentially having to take some sort of oath, like a doctor takes an oath, right? So I think there's something to the idea of responsible application of this technology. So I was thinking, if I could bring Lyron and David, as you think about responsibly bringing this technology into your environments, Lyron, into your overarching environment. David, maybe it's the data information bias question, David, that's particularly interesting there. I'm just wondering if you can comment. I know for us at EY, we have like an AI code. It's built into our code of conduct, a set of principles about how we will use AI. So I'll jump all that, but maybe Lyron, since you came off mute first, Lyron, talk about how you think about responsibility as you bring this technology into your products. And then David, same question to you.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and kind of I agree with kind of almost everything that Emily said. Kind of those are kind of really questions, but as society, kind of my point of view is we can't stop progress. We won't be able to stop it. Kind of the world is full of either dangerous things, cars, guns, and so on, and they're continue being developed, as well as people that are doing dangerous things for a good cause, like doctors and so on. And kind of we as society has put some rules around how people should use these. You need to get a driver's license, you need to get a gun permit in most places, doctors have their oath, and on. They need to go through many years of training before they are allowed to actually practice on people, and kind of even psychologists and everybody needs to kind of go through the motions and get. So kind of having this AI code of how do you use AI? How do you let people know that they're dealing with AI? Because right now it's still pretty easy to know, but at some point you're going to get into a virtual party and you have AI there and you don't know if it's kind of a real person or a virtual person, and kind of you don't want to be kind of spending kind of time trying to basically kind of connect with a kind of virtual person if that's not what you're looking for. So kind of there's a lot of rules that we as society, and we're starting internally to try and kind of basically make sure people are aware where AI is involved, kind of make sure that they're aware that everything the AI said at this point, it's all early in the cycle. We can't control it. The people generating the technology don't control it. So take that with a grain of salt. Never rely on AI for any advice, kind of, because some of the things we're integrating AI into is medical training. So you don't want to be kind of the kind of nurse trainee with a AI doctor and suddenly kind of the doctor in the virtual reality simulation said so-and-so, now I'm practicing and kind of maybe I'll try that. Kind of, so it's very important to kind of set the stage and kind of basically understand that this is more role play, this is more for kind of entertainment or engagement or practice, rather than you should rely on that. One day we might get there, but kind of we're a long ways away.
I like that. So responsibility in the implementation, but also responsibility in how you think about describing your product to your end customer and the extent to which it should be used, that you are careful about that. And I love that. And it feels like and maybe broadly at the Asia Society, we should get this conversation going. Maybe we do need that oath that we do amongst us, or Bill of Rights is probably the wrong concept, but the bill of how we think this technology should be implemented and how it should be responsible. David, I think a similar question to you, because we're just getting a ton of questions that I think you can see around how do you make sure there's no bias in the data? Yeah. How do you make sure it's accurate data? So David, what are your thoughts around, because you have one of the more famous, maybe the most famous current implementation of an LLM in a true enterprise fashion.
So I'll take this first outside the four walls of Morgan Stanley. Having spoken with OpenAI, a number of other firms, it's really hard. And the reason it's really hard to agree on responsible is we as human beings, we don't agree on many things, right? Ideally for OpenAI, they'd love to have some type of a governing body at the federal administrative level, but who do you staff in that? That's really hard. One of the things that I've taken a lot of grief for is I work at a bank, and there was a perception, and news came out that ChatGPT is left-wing biased, right? And the argument that ultimately what really happens is most of the training data comes from the public media, and some would argue the general media tends to be a little left-wing. So then you start to ask, what do you control around what belongs in the training type of data around these models. It's a very, very complicated question. It really is. I think I agree with Lyron and Emily in the sense that putting that aside, we can think about what it makes sense for our respective areas, right? And I'll push it a little bit more inward. I work at a bank, which along with healthcare is the most regulated industry, because it turns out people care a lot about their health and people care a lot about their money. So some of it is by our personal choice to be responsible. A lot of it is by regulators, right? Who say you have to be really responsible. And the way I think about it is I spend a lot of time with our legal compliance risk partners. I spend a lot of time with FAs, and it started many months ago with just showing them. You got to show them what this is. The more mysterious it becomes, the more nefarious it seems. So even back before ChatGPT, we sat down and we came up with, can we come up with some examples of it'll generate an email? We did a thing where we showed Andy Saperstein how it can write, who's a co-president of Morgan Stanley. We can show it how it can write a poem about Morgan Stanley, right? Some of this like light foo-foo type of stuff that doesn't have business value just makes people better understand that. And the more they understood it, the more our goal was to try to make them a part of the team, right? Like we needed our compliance partners to feel like they understood this. We needed to sit down and explain what GPT technology and transformer technology was to our model risk management partners, right? So, and then we needed the FAs, candidly, to not feel that we're trying to take their jobs away, right? And we had to sit down and we said, okay, rather than David Wu trying to come up with use cases, sir, tell me what are the 10 productivity value adding use cases that would help you the most, and how do I use that as a starting point, right? And a lot of that, a mix of all of these three things is how we try to approach responsible. But I will say it can't be a single person. If a single person tries to decide what the responsible approach should be for the firm, I think you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And that's where diversity and inclusion and Emily's points really, really resonate with me. We got to get the right people in the room as we think through these decisions.
So I think we're going to have to come back to, if we have it in our time to come back to it, but I did want to hit on a topic, a different topic that came up inside of the questions, which is how is generative AI developing in other regions around the world, especially Asia? And as you think through jump all to the group, as you think through that, the context, of course, is the seminal paper around GPT Transformers paper actually came out of Silicon Valley, came out of Google a few years-ish ago, right? So I think you do see a lot of the early announcements, the early companies are all based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but that is spreading relatively rapidly. So does anyone want to take what are you seeing in other regions of the world, including Asia? Does anyone want to go first? Or David, you came off mute, so you win.
Yeah, I can take a crack at that because I actually spent time talking with a Chinese bank last week around this. China, most recently, Baidu and Alibaba, I believe, released their versions of ChatGPT, right? They're arguably a little behind, but they can quickly catch up. I believe Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, said that he sees China coming up very, very quickly through a combination of the sheer force of the compute that they can throw at this, right? The scale, the amount of data that they can push at this, right? One of the largest LMs ever created was WuDao 2.0 or something like that, like a 2 billion parameter transformer. And they have a national desire to advance in AI. So I quickly see China emerging as a bigger player. In fact, yesterday, at the point around ethics, the Chinese Communist government just came out with a standard saying anything with generative AI needs to ensure that Communist Party values are applied in this, which I don't know what that means, right? But you can tell if they're coming out with a view that is something important to them. And then obviously the big, from a China perspective, from a AI perspective, chips, right? Taiwan Semiconductor and NVIDIA are making the chips that are powering all this right now. I don't think I need to tell the group the strategic importance that Taiwan plays in the broader fabric around this. And so those are my 2 cents, and I ask my colleagues to chime in.
I don't know if Lyron or Emily want to chime in I'll say I'm hearing similar things, David. If you look actually back through history, as China's ability to align the regulatory frameworks, the government investment with the private investment into specific technologies, and AI is clearly a named technology, that it is an impressive movement forward for them. And I do think that primarily when it comes to generative AI, we see the US companies and the Chinese companies being at the forefront of that competition. And so, just something that's interesting to observe is different regulatory frameworks can allow for different outcomes. And so when you see some regions of the world, just to try to answer some of the questions, you see some regions of the world with more restrictive regulatory frameworks, whether that's data privacy or how, it tends to be on data privacy, but it also could be how the models are implemented and used, or the bar of explainability before it's used in certain circumstances. When you put those regulatory frameworks and they're more restrictive, it makes it more expensive to be in those environments. So I think companies naturally gravitate to other environments. I think that's why you end up with this idea that China and the US, those companies tend to or appear to have the early lead and, might be able to ride that to bigger and bigger things. Now, there's only 8 minutes left, and there's a lot of questions which we won't get to all of them. I want to actually think about the future a little bit and think a bit optimistically about the future. And what are you seeing or hearing about sort of the opportunities when we think about AI, generative AI, and we look forward? Like, how are people imagining that future, imagining the positive possibilities? And I think one of the questions was around climate. Right? Are people thinking about climate or ESG differently and using this technology and tool differently? Emily, I'm going to pick on you first because I know your students. I've been to some of your programs in person and see you ask them explicitly to think about this every year in that program. So I'm just curious about what you've seen more recently from these amazing, high schoolers who are thinking about the world differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. I was like chomping at the bit to answer that question. So, because these are the things really that that give me a lot of hope about what's possible as long as these students are supported and empowered. And for both our high school and our college students, there's just such an incredible creativity and excitement. You mentioned climate. That's a huge one that comes up. And I think that one of the first things that we teach our students is that AI is particularly good at pattern recognition, right? And finding patterns among a large data set. And there's a lot that you can do to support climate change and supporting the environment from that perspective. One of the other tools that one of our students worked on a few years ago that I'm excited to see where she takes it now with these new types of chat tools. But one was a student developed an algorithm to really create a better emergency dispatch system. And she lived in an area where it was hard to get an ambulance to come in a reasonable amount of time, and thinking about, socioeconomic conditions, different geographic realities. There are really great ways that we could be applying these tools to solve important problems like that. Another that has come up in one of our college student projects this semester, and this is, I think, a really exciting potential area, is how do you use, is there a use, with a human in the loop for ChatGPT type of tools for elderly folks who are lonely, for therapy, right? For talk therapy. Is that a reasonable way to scale some of these types of needs? So folks talk about the loneliness epidemic and kind of the mental health crisis for students as well coming out of COVID. And I think that there's a real potential. I think, again, it's where we have to be super careful. And to David's point earlier, I think where we should support humans where they can shine in their empathy and care for others. But at the same time, there's some pretty urgent problems. And I think that the idea of using using chatbots as like an assistive tool, right? So not being a replacement for a human being, but perhaps a way to scale different types of support, is a really great potential. And that's something that our students see. You know, they're most of our students are kind of technically within Gen Z. And so that's something that they care about and see, you know, are either experiencing themselves or see their peers experiencing, that there's, you know, really this kind of disconnect. And, you know, I think there's an interest in how can we utilize these tools and kind of own trying to solve those problems instead of, you know, kind of letting them kind of go where they may, and they will probably end up being used in some form that's less helpful.
That's fantastic. I love going to the sessions with the students. It's just they tell us the world they want, and they're bold enough to realize that they can create it. David, Lyron, I just want to make sure in the last few minutes that you had a chance to talk about sort of what you see in the future.
So I'll take a quick one and let David close us off as we're running out of time. So kind of a couple of things that I see as kind of the future where this comes. First of all, we're going to level the playing field in terms of knowledge. And kind of if you look at knowledge and kind of obviously kind of the digital era, the internet opened up a lot of knowledge to a lot of people, but you still need to know what you're looking for, and you need to understand it and be able to kind of consume it and even understand the language. And if your English is not your main language, kind of reading even a basic kind of paper would be very hard for most people in the world. Now with kind of where AI is, and as David kind of, I think, used an example where we're doing the kind of the session before, you can basically ask it to give it to you as a 5-year-old and kind of basically say, imagine I care about the theory of relativity, which is way above our heads, but explain to me as if I'm a 5-year-old. And you start getting that knowledge, and it could be done in English or Chinese or Portuguese or any language, and kind of really allow people to have access to basically the field of knowledge. Once we govern kind of how the knowledge is there and what's right and what's not, all the things we touched about. The second thing, and the vision of creating the metaverse, and for me, the metaverse is going to basically fully enable globalization, because we will all be living kind of, obviously we'll have our physical life, but on virtually we'll be living in the same world, and it doesn't matter where you're from, and it will open up work. And kind of AI will not only take a key role in participating in the metaverse, it will help build that. There's not enough kind of designers and programmers in the world, even if you convert everyone that does old school technology to immersive technologies, to build the vision of the metaverse that we're doing. The metaverse will be built by human with a lot of AI help. And I think that's the second driver. And I'll let David close us off in the last couple of minutes.
Wow, great. Thanks, Lyron. David.
Thank you very much, Lyron. I agree with so much of what you just said. One stat I would say is our competitors, but also friends at Goldman Sachs published research. They expect in 10 years, the GDP will increase by $7 trillion or so as a result of the productivity gain coming from generative AI. So that's kind of a statistical piece. But I really go back to what Lyron said, the barriers to entry around knowledge will go down dramatically. You know, sometimes people have a leg up because they have that secret information, or they just have that experience because they read something earlier, or someone has access to or information the others, like that stuff will start to go down, and there will be more commoditization around that, which really puts me back at a belief that the effort we're spending into looking for information, synthesizing it, I think will be redeployed towards humans trying to figure out, how do I convince people to do something, right? How do I better listen to them and gather data that's in their head, that's not in the training data of the large language model, right? And how do I, convince them to do, how am I empathetic? And I think to the pandemic, when the pandemic ended, first thing everyone did is go out and see other people, right? And I think there's going to be more and more of that element, because at the end of the day, like, everyone talks about generative AI, but I go back to the human, right? So.
No, that's great, David. So just in close, thank you so much, Lyron, Emily, and David. Fantastic conversation. We could have kept going. There's many more questions that we'll have to find a way to answer. But I will say this generative AI moment feels very special. I'm going to reveal that I watch too much TV and see too many movies. because it makes me think like we suddenly have either Harry Potter's magic wand or Black Panther's vibranium, right? And with that great, in each of those stories, with that great power comes immense possibility, but also responsibility. And I think that that's the thought I would want to leave us. And I think this, you all three of you covered so well, both the opportunities, but also the responsibilities we have at this moment. So thank you so much. Thank you to the Asia Society. Thank you to our very engaged audience. We really appreciate having all of your time. Thank you.